She was supposed to walk across that stage on June 6, 1998, top of her class, full scholarship to MIT, speech already written, tucked into her desk drawer alongside acceptance letters from 6 Ivy League schools. But when the auditorium lights dimmed and the processional music began, seat number 1, reserved for the valedictorian, remained empty. Sarah Wexler never showed up to her own graduation. The search started within hours. Small town. Everyone knew everyone. And everyone knew Sarah didn't just not show up to things. She'd never missed a single day of school in 12 years. Never turned in an assignment late. Never broke curfew. The kind of precision that made teachers love her and peers keep a respectful distance. So when her parents found her car still parked in the driveway that Saturday morning, keys on the kitchen counter, purse on her bed, the panic was immediate, but it was what they found 3 days later that turned confusion into something darker. Behind a locked maintenance door in the school's east wing, a door that had been painted shut for over a decade, someone discovered her cap and gown, neatly folded, the tassel still attached, her name card placed on top like a memorial marker. The door had been locked from the inside. No other exit, no windows, just concrete walls, old boiler equipment, and Sarah's graduation regalia arranged like she'd meant to come back for it. The police had questions, her parents had theories, her best friend had secrets, and the school itself had a history that nobody wanted to talk about, one that involved another locked door, another disappearance, and another promising student who vanished exactly 40 years earlier. Some said Sarah ran away. Others whispered about foul play. But the ones who'd grown up in that town, the ones who remembered the stories their grandparents told, they knew this wasn't the first time someone disappeared from Richland High, and they knew those old hallways kept their secrets buried deep. If you want to hear what really happened, and what investigators uncovered when they finally opened the school's sealed records, hit that like button and drop a comment below. Because this story goes places nobody expected. And trust me, the truth is so much stranger than the theories. Richland, Pennsylvania wasn't the kind of place where extraordinary things happened. Population 4,200, 1 high school, 2 churches, a main street with shops that closed at 5:30 and didn't bother opening on Sundays. The kind of town where graduation wasn't just a ceremony, it was the event of the year, second only to the 4th of July parade and the Autumn Harvest Festival. Sarah Wexler embodied everything that town valued: discipline, achievement, quiet excellence. Her father taught chemistry at Richland High, which meant she'd grown up in those hallways, playing in empty classrooms while he graded papers, memorizing the building's layout like other kids memorized their own homes. Her mother worked as the town librarian, a job that suited the family's reputation for being knowledgeable, helpful, and just private enough to avoid gossip. From kindergarten onward, Sarah had been exceptional. Not in the flashy way that made people uncomfortable. She didn't brag or compete openly. She simply delivered. Perfect test scores. Science fair winner, 3 years running. State debate, champion. The kind of student whose college applications made admissions officers pause and reread, just to make sure they weren't missing something. MIT had offered her a full ride. So had Princeton. Stanford sent a handwritten note from the dean, but if you asked her classmates what they really knew about Sarah, most would hesitate. She was friendly, but not close. Present, but not quite there. She ate lunch with the same 3 people every day. Marcus Wong, who'd been her lab partner since freshman year. Jennifer Hastings, who lived 2 doors down and had known her since childhood. And David Kowalski, the quiet artist who Sarah tutored in calculus. They weren't exactly friends in the traditional sense, more like satellites orbiting the same predictable path. The week before graduation had been unremarkable. Sarah attended all her classes despite being exempt from finals. She stayed late Tuesday to help organize the senior gift, a bronze plaque honoring distinguished alumni. Wednesday, she met with Principal Harmon to review her valedictorian speech one final time. Thursday evening, she was seen at the public library, returning books, and checking out 2 more, one about architectural history, another about quantum physics. Both were due back on June 15th. She never returned them. Friday night was the senior bonfire at Miller's Field, an unofficial tradition the school administration pretended not to know about. Sarah had surprised everyone by actually showing up, standing near the fire with a paper cup of soda, watching classmates sign each other's yearbooks and make promises about staying in touch. Jennifer later told police that Sarah had seemed distracted that night. Not upset, just elsewhere. When Jennifer asked if she was nervous about the speech, Sarah had smiled, that same polite, measured smile she always used, and said, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She left the bonfire around 10:30, alone, driving her mother's sedan because her own car had been in the shop all week. 3 people saw her leave. Nobody saw her arrive home. Her parents assumed she'd gone straight to bed. They'd been planning to wake her early Saturday for a special graduation breakfast. Her mother had bought ingredients for French toast, Sarah's childhood favorite. But when Margaret Wexler knocked on her daughter's door at 7 a.m., there was no answer. The door was unlocked. The bed was made. Hospital corners, same as always. Nothing disturbed. The white graduation dress hung on the closet door where Sarah had placed it Thursday night, still wrapped in dry cleaning plastic. Her shoes, white flats, selected specifically because the stage had shallow steps, waited on the floor beneath it. Everything was ready, except Sarah was gone. Her father checked the garage. Car there. He checked the driveway. No second car. He called Jennifer. No answer. She was still asleep. He called Marcus. He hadn't heard from Sarah since Thursday. By 8 a.m., with the graduation ceremony 4 hours away, Thomas Wexler called the police. The responding officer was Deputy Bill Henderson, who taught Sarah's DARE class in 5th grade. He asked the standard questions. Had they argued? No. Did Sarah have a boyfriend? No. Any signs of depression? Never. Drug use? Absolutely not. Was anything missing? Her parents checked. Wallet still in her purse. House keys on the kitchen counter. Toothbrush in the bathroom. Laptop on her desk, plugged in and charging. Even her carefully written valedictorian speech remained in the top drawer, printed on cream cardstock, edges perfectly aligned. Nothing was missing except Sarah herself. By 10 a.m., the search had expanded. Volunteers combed the woods behind the Wexler property. The police questioned neighbors. Someone checked the hospital. The graduation ceremony was delayed, then quietly continued without her. Principal Harmon gave a brief, carefully worded statement about a family emergency that fooled nobody. Seat number 1 remained empty. The valedictorian speech was never delivered. Sunday brought more volunteers, cadaver dogs, and a growing sense that something was very, very wrong. Richland didn't lose its children, especially not children like Sarah Wexler, especially not the day before they were supposed to leave for bigger, better places. And then, Monday morning, a janitor named Ray Torres made a discovery that would turn the entire investigation inside out. Ray Torres had worked at Richland High for 23 years. He knew every closet, every basement corner, every architectural quirk in a building that had been constructed in 1952 and expanded 3 times since. The East Wing maintenance room was on his mental map, but not his actual rounds. It had been sealed off back in 1986 after asbestos abatement. The door painted over, technically still accessible, but functionally forgotten. Kids didn't even know it existed. Monday morning, June 8th, Ray was responding to a leak in the East Wing second-floor bathroom. Water was seeping through the ceiling tiles, which meant checking the pipe access points. The maintenance room was directly below. When he reached the old door, he noticed something immediately wrong. Fresh scratches around the lock, the paint seal broken, and the door itself slightly ajar, maybe an inch, enough to wedge fingers through, but not enough to see inside. He pushed it open. The room was exactly as he remembered. 12 by 15 feet, concrete floor, exposed pipes along the ceiling, An old boiler that hadn't been operational since the Carter administration. Dust. Everywhere. Except on the floor near the center of the room, where something had been placed recently enough that the surrounding dust remained undisturbed. Sarah's cap and gown lay folded in a precise rectangle. The white tassel caught the dim light from Ray's flashlight. On top, her name card, the one that should have been clipped to her seat at graduation, rested like a calling card. And beside the folded regalia, someone had placed a single item that made Ray immediately back out of the room and call the police. Sarah's class ring, the one she'd worn every day since junior year, the one with her initials engraved inside the band. When Deputy Henderson arrived, he did 3 things in quick succession. First, he photographed everything without touching it. Second, he checked the door's lock mechanism, old-fashioned deadbolt, requiring a key from either side and currently locked in the engaged position. Third, he stepped into the hallway and asked Ray a question that would define the entire investigation. How did someone lock this from the inside with no way out? There was no answer. The state police arrived by early afternoon. Crime scene investigators processed the maintenance room with forensic precision. They found Sarah's fingerprints on the cap and gown. Expected, since these were her belongings. They found no other prints. No footprints in the dust except Ray's and the investigator's own. No signs of struggle. No blood. No hair samples beyond what would naturally shed from Sarah handling her own clothing. The doorframe showed no signs of forced entry from either side. The lock mechanism worked perfectly. You could turn it from inside if you had the key, but there was no key in the room. And more puzzling still, the hinges were on the outside, meaning someone couldn't have removed and replaced them from within. The room had one ventilation grate, 10 inches by 6 inches, secured with screws that showed no signs of tampering. Even a child couldn't have fit through. There were no ceiling tiles, just exposed pipes and concrete. The walls were solid concrete block, built when the school was constructed in an era that didn't cut corners, no hidden panels, no secret passages. The investigators spent 6 hours checking every surface, every joint, every theoretically possible point of entry or exit. The maintenance room was sealed tighter than a bank vault, and Sarah's graduation regalia had somehow been placed inside a locked room that had no accessible entry point. Then came the second discovery. Detective Linda Vance was examining the school's architectural records when she noticed something odd in the building's original blueprints from 1952. The East Wing maintenance room showed a notation in faded engineer's handwriting: secondary access via connecting corridor, sealed during 1958 renovation. She showed the plans to Principal Harmon, who'd been employed at Richland High for 18 years and had never heard of any connecting corridor. They brought in a contractor with ground-penetrating radar. Wednesday afternoon, they found it. A sealed doorway in the maintenance room's north wall, hidden behind the old boiler and covered with what appeared to be the same concrete block as the surrounding wall, but applied years after original construction. Someone had built a doorway, used it for 6 years, then sealed it permanently. And according to the blueprints, that corridor connected to somewhere else in the building, but that section of the plans was missing, cut away cleanly as if someone had deliberately removed the evidence. Principal Harmon authorized breaking through. By Thursday morning, contractors had created a hole large enough to see through. Detective Vance shined her flashlight into the darkness beyond. What she saw was a corridor approximately 40 feet long, concrete floor and walls, sloping slightly downward. Old electrical conduit ran along the ceiling, still wrapped in cloth insulation from the 1950s. At the far end, another door stood closed. And on the walls along the corridor, someone had written something in what appeared to be chalk or pale paint, repeated over and over in increasingly frantic handwriting. She said I could leave. She said I could leave. She said I could leave. The writing covered both walls for the entire length of the corridor. Dozens of repetitions, maybe hundreds. And at the very end, where the corridor met the second door, someone had scratched into the concrete itself. deep enough to require serious tools or desperate strength. 1958, Elizabeth. Jennifer Hastings, when shown a photograph of the writing, went pale and asked the question investigators were already asking. Who's Elizabeth? The school's records didn't have an immediate answer, but Margaret Wexler, Sarah's mother, did. She was at the police station Friday afternoon when Detective Vance showed her the photographs from the corridor. Margaret stared at the name Elizabeth for a long moment before speaking. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled. That's Elizabeth Hartwell. She disappeared from Richland High on June 5th, 1958, exactly 40 years before Sarah. She was valedictorian, too. My mother knew her. They were in the same graduating class. Elizabeth never showed up to graduation. They found her belongings in the school, but they never found Elizabeth. Detective Vance set down her pen. Why didn't you mention this earlier? Because, Margaret said quietly, I thought it was just a story. The kind of thing small towns tell themselves. I didn't think it was real. And I definitely didn't think it had anything to do with my daughter. But it did. The Richland County Historical Society kept meticulous records. By Friday evening, Detective Vance had requested everything related to 1958, and by Saturday morning, she was reading through newspaper clippings that told a disturbingly familiar story. Elizabeth Hartwell, valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, accepted to 7 prestigious universities, including Radcliffe College, described by teachers as exceptionally bright, remarkably composed, and destined for greatness. Disappeared June 5th, 1958, the day before graduation. Last seen leaving school Thursday evening after helping arrange the auditorium for the ceremony. Her cap and gown were discovered 3 days later behind a locked maintenance door in the East Wing, the same door where Sarah's regalia had been found 40 years later. The parallels were impossible to ignore. Both girls, valedictorians, both disappeared the day before graduation. Both left behind their graduation regalia in the same locked room. Both showed no signs of planning to run away. Both came from respected families with no history of trouble. The 1958 investigation had lasted 3 months. Police interviewed everyone who'd known Elizabeth. They searched the surrounding woods and fields. They dragged the nearby reservoir. They questioned a vagrant who'd been seen near the school that week. They investigated a janitor who'd been fired for drinking on the job. They pursued a theory that Elizabeth had run away to avoid an arranged marriage. Her parents were traditional, and there were rumors she'd wanted to attend Radcliffe against their wishes. Nothing led anywhere. Elizabeth Hartwell simply vanished, and eventually, the case went cold. The locked maintenance room became local legend, something whispered about but not seriously discussed. The door was painted shut. Life continued. And 40 years later, almost everyone who remembered Elizabeth firsthand was either elderly or dead. Except one person. Detective Vance found her Sunday afternoon, Dorothy Marsh, formerly Dorothy Hartwell, Elizabeth's younger sister. She was 72 now, living in a nursing facility 2 towns over, her mind still sharp, but her memories of 1958 obviously painful. When Detective Vance showed her the photographs from the sealed corridor, Dorothy began to cry. I told them, she said. I told the police back then, but nobody believed me. They said I was traumatized, that I was making things up because I couldn't accept that Elizabeth was gone. What did you tell them? Detective Vance asked gently. Dorothy took a shaky breath. About Miss Hartwell, about the music teacher, about what Elizabeth told me the night before she disappeared. The story came out slowly, 40 years of silence breaking apart. Miss Hartwell, no relation, despite the shared name, had been Richland High's music teacher from 1952 until 1959. She taught choir, orchestra, and music theory. She was in her mid-30s, unmarried, living alone in a small house on Maple Street. Students described her as kind but intense, passionate about music but peculiar in her habits. She rarely attended social events. She kept her classroom locked even during the day. and she had a tendency to form close mentorship relationships with the brightest students, always girls, always high achievers, always seniors planning to leave Richland for college. Elizabeth had been one of those students. She'd joined choir freshman year and quickly become Miss Hartwell's star pupil. By senior year, she was staying after school 3 or 4 days a week, supposedly practicing for college auditions despite planning to study mathematics, not music. Dorothy remembered her sister coming home late, distracted, sometimes humming melodies that didn't sound like anything they played on the radio. The night before, Elizabeth disappeared. She'd told Dorothy something strange. They'd been sharing a bedroom. Money was tight in 1958, and their parents couldn't afford a larger house. Elizabeth had been sitting on her bed, folding her graduation gown, when she'd said, "Miss Hartwell told me I don't have to leave. She said there's a way to stay forever, to be perfect forever, to never have to face what comes next. She said she can help me." Dorothy had asked what she meant. Elizabeth had smiled. Dorothy remembered that smile, remembered how it hadn't quite reached her eyes, and said, "You wouldn't understand yet. But someday, when you're about to leave everything behind, you'll understand why staying sounds better." The next day, Elizabeth was gone. Detective Vance asked the obvious question. "Did you tell the 1958 investigators about this conversation?" "Yes," Dorothy said. "But by the time I told them, Miss Hartwell was already dead. Heart attack. Died in her classroom, right at her desk. August 1959, about 2 months after Elizabeth disappeared. They said it was a heart condition, undiagnosed, natural causes. So the police said there was nothing to investigate, that maybe Miss Hartwell had known something but took it to her grave. Did they search her house? Her belongings? I don't know. I was 14. Nobody told me the details. But I remember my mother mentioning that Miss Hartwell's family, she had a brother in Ohio, came and cleared out her house very quickly. Sold it that same month. Everything gone within weeks." Detective Vance made notes. Miss Hartwell's classroom in 1958 would have been in the East Wing, where the music rooms used to be located before the 1986 renovation, moved them to the new Performing Arts Edition, the same wing where the maintenance room and the sealed corridor had been found, the same area where Sarah's cap and gown had been discovered. But there was still the impossible question. How had anyone placed items in a locked room with no accessible entry? And where were Elizabeth and Sarah? The answer came Monday morning when contractors finally broke through the second door at the far end of the sealed corridor. The door at the corridor's end was older than the maintenance room door, hand-carved wood with iron hardware, the kind of craftsmanship you'd expect from the building's original 1952 construction. The lock was rusted solid. The contractors had to remove the hinges. When the door finally opened, Detective Vance stepped into a room that shouldn't have existed. It was larger than expected, approximately 20 by 30 feet, with a ceiling higher than the maintenance room or corridor. The walls were brick rather than concrete block, suggesting this space predated the rest of the East Wing. Old plaster covered the bricks in patches, flaking away to reveal the structure beneath. Along one wall stood a series of built-in cabinets with glass doors, the kind used in classrooms of an earlier era, and in the center of the room, positioned carefully on what appeared to be a very old wooden desk, sat a box. The box was metal, painted dark green, about the size of a shoebox. A small padlock held it closed. Next to it lay a leather journal, water-stained and brittle with age. Detective Vance photographed everything before touching anything. The crime scene team swept the room for prints, DNA, trace evidence. What they found was minimal. Decades of undisturbed dust. No recent footprints. No signs that anyone had entered this room in years. The door they'd just opened showed rust patterns consistent with being sealed since approximately 1960. But the box and journal were placed on that desk as if waiting for someone to find them. The padlock on the box was corroded. A bolt cutter opened it easily. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been white but had yellowed over time, they found a stack of photographs and a smaller envelope. The photographs showed students, girls, all appearing to be in their late teens, all photographed individually in what appeared to be the same location, a room with brick walls and built-in cabinets, the same room they were standing in. Each girl wore their graduation regalia. Each girl smiled at the camera. Each photograph had a name and date written on the back in neat handwriting: Elizabeth Hartwell, June 1958. And beneath her photograph, there were others, 9 more to be exact. The earliest was dated 1954. The most recent was 1957. All girls, all valedictorians, all disappeared from Richland High the day before graduation. All cases that had been filed away as runaways or unsolved mysteries, spread across 4 years when graduation ceremonies kept losing their top students, and nobody had connected the pattern. 10 girls total, all photographed in this room, all wearing their caps and gowns, all smiling that same smile that didn't quite reach their eyes. The envelope contained a single piece of paper, a letter written in the same neat handwriting as the photograph labels. To whoever finds this, I tried to help them. I truly did. They were so afraid of leaving, so terrified of the world waiting beyond these walls. I offered them a choice: stay perfect forever, or risk becoming ordinary. They all chose to stay. I showed them how. The room beneath holds what they were. The room above holds what they became. And the space between is where they chose to remain. I have no regrets. I gave them what they wanted: safety, perfection, permanence. When my time comes, I'll join them. We'll all be here together, exactly as we should be. Forever. A.H. A.H. Ann Hartwell, the music teacher. Detective Vance read the letter 3 times before speaking. Check the floor. If she wrote "the room beneath," there's something below us. The contractors used the ground-penetrating radar again. Within an hour, they'd located a hollow space directly beneath the brick room, a sub-basement level that didn't appear on any official blueprints. Accessing it required cutting through the floor, which took most of Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, they'd created an opening large enough to lower a camera through. What the camera showed was a small chamber, maybe 10 feet by 10 feet, with earthen walls and a floor that appeared to be packed dirt. And in that dirt, barely visible in the camera's LED light, were shapes, uneven shapes, disturbed earth, the kind of patterns that made forensic specialists reach for their phones and call for backup. They began excavating Wednesday afternoon. By evening, they'd found the first skeleton. By Thursday morning, they'd found 10. All female, all approximately the same age, all positioned carefully, almost reverently, in shallow graves. And each skeleton wore the remnants of what had once been a graduation gown, the synthetic fabric surviving better than the natural fibers, but still deteriorated after decades underground. Dental records would take weeks, but Detective Vance already knew what they'd confirm. These were the missing valedictorians, Elizabeth Hartwell, and 9 others. All killed sometime in the days after their graduation ceremonies they never attended. But Sarah Wexler's remains were not among them. The question that haunted the investigation room that Thursday night was obvious. If Sarah had met the same fate as the others, where was she? And if she hadn't, where had she been for 8 days? The answer came Friday morning from an unexpected source. Marcus Wong, Sarah's lab partner. He'd been watching the news coverage of the discovered bodies. He'd seen the reporters standing outside Richland High, talking about the hidden rooms, and the dead girls, and the teacher who'd killed them. And he'd remembered something Sarah had said to him 3 weeks before graduation, during one of their last lab sessions together. They'd been discussing their college plans. Marcus was heading to Penn State for engineering. Sarah, of course, had MIT. She'd seemed distracted that day, cleaning beakers with unusual care, arranging equipment with more precision than the task required. Finally, she'd stopped and asked him a question. "Do you ever feel like you're not ready? Like everyone expects you to be this person, but you're not sure that person actually exists? Marcus had made a joke about imposter syndrome, about how everyone felt that way before college. But Sarah hadn't laughed. She'd looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite identify and said, "Someone told me there's a way to stop time, to stay exactly as you are, forever, so you never have to become whatever disappointing thing you might turn into. Would you take that option if you could?" Marcus had said no, obviously. But he remembered that Sarah hadn't answered her own question. She'd just smiled. That same smile everyone kept describing, and changed the subject. He told Detective Vance this story Friday morning, and that afternoon, when they were reviewing surveillance footage from the school's security cameras for the 100th time, someone noticed something they'd missed before. The security footage from Friday, June 5th, the night Sarah was last seen at the senior bonfire, showed her arriving back at the school at 10:47 p.m., her mother's sedan pulling into the parking lot, Sarah getting out. But instead of driving away, she'd walked toward the East Wing entrance. The camera angles didn't cover that specific door, but timestamps from the building's keycard access system told the rest of the story. Someone had used a faculty keycard to unlock the East Wing at 10:51 p.m. The card belonged to Thomas Wexler, Sarah's father, the chemistry teacher. But Thomas had been home Friday night, nowhere near the school. His card had been missing from his wallet since Wednesday, something he'd mentioned to police but hadn't considered significant. Sarah had her father's keycard. She'd entered the building alone. And she'd known exactly where she was going. Detective Vance requested access to all of Sarah's belongings again. This time, they were looking for something specific. Any connection to Anne Hartwell? Any indication that Sarah knew about the previous disappearances? Any evidence of research or planning? They found it Saturday evening in Sarah's laptop, which had been returned to her parents after initial forensic analysis found nothing suspicious. But this time, they checked the browser history more carefully. And buried in the cache, deleted but still recoverable, they found searches dating back 4 months. Richland High School, 1958 disappearance. Elizabeth Hartwell, valedictorian. Anne Hartwell, music teacher. Sealed rooms. Richland High. School architectural plans, 1952. Sarah had been investigating. She'd known about Elizabeth and the others. She'd been researching for months. But why? What had triggered that research? Jennifer Hastings provided the final piece Sunday afternoon. She'd been avoiding police since the bodies were discovered, not because she was hiding evidence, but because she was terrified of being connected to whatever had happened to Sarah. But her conscience finally won out. She called Detective Vance and asked to meet privately. The story she told was simple, but devastating. Back in February, the school had been doing renovations in the music wing. Workers had found something during demolition. An old file cabinet hidden behind a wall, left there probably during the 1986 renovation, and accidentally sealed into the structure. The cabinet contained Anne Hartwell's teaching records from the 1950s, student files, lesson plans, and a journal, not the water-stained one found in the hidden room, but a different one, more recent, detailing her philosophy of preservation. The principal's office had disposed of most of it. Records that old had no real value, and nobody wanted to create a historical drama. But before everything was thrown out, Jennifer had seen Sarah looking through the materials. Sarah had taken one of Anne Hartwell's journals home with her. Jennifer had thought nothing of it at the time. Sarah was interested in history, always researching random topics. It had seemed innocent. But apparently, Anne Hartwell's journal had contained something that fascinated Sarah. Instructions, maybe, or justifications, or a philosophy that appealed to someone terrified of failing to live up to impossible expectations. The journal Jennifer described was never found. Sarah had hidden it, or destroyed it, or taken it with her that Friday night. Detective Vance assembled the timeline. February, Sarah discovers Anne Hartwell's journal. February-May, Sarah researches the previous disappearances, studies the school's architecture, plans. Early June, Sarah steals her father's keycard. June 5th, Sarah attends the bonfire, leaves early, enters the school using the key card. June 6th. Sarah is supposed to graduate, but never appears. June 8th. Sarah's cap and gown are found in the locked maintenance room, but there was still the impossible question. How did she lock the door from the inside with no way out, and more importantly, where was she now? The answer came Monday morning when investigators finally checked a location nobody had thought to search. The school's bell tower. Richland High's bell tower was original to the 1952 construction, a decorative element that housed the school's old bell system before it was replaced with electronic chimes in 1989. The tower was accessible only through a locked hatch in the ceiling of the East Wing's third floor. It hadn't been opened in years. The lock was rusted. But when they finally got the hatch open and sent someone up the ladder, they found Sarah Wexler. She was alive. She was sitting in the corner of the bell tower, her white graduation dress filthy and torn, her face sunken from dehydration, her eyes open but unfocused. She'd been there for 9 days, without food, with only minimal water from an old pipe that dripped condensation. She was severely dehydrated, malnourished, and suffering from exposure, but she was breathing. The EMTs got her down carefully. She was rushed to the hospital. And 3 days later, when she was finally stable enough to speak, she told investigators what had happened. Sarah's story, told in fragments over several days of recovery, was both simpler and stranger than anyone expected. She had found Anne Hartwell's journal in February, and in that journal, Hartwell had described her philosophy with disturbing clarity. Some students were too perfect to be allowed to fail. The world would corrupt them, disappoint them, turn them into lesser versions of themselves. Hartwell had found a way to preserve them, to keep them perfect forever, frozen in that moment right before transformation. But Sarah hadn't read the journal as a warning. She'd read it as an option. Because Sarah was terrified. Not of college or failure in the traditional sense, but of the impossible weight of being Sarah Wexler, perfect student, perfect daughter, perfect example. She was exhausted from maintaining precision and absolutely paralyzed by the thought of going to MIT, of being surrounded by people smarter than her, of inevitably becoming ordinary. So she'd planned carefully, stolen her father's keycard. Friday night, after the bonfire, she'd entered the school and made her way to the bell tower. Not the hidden room where the others had died, but a different space, isolated and accessible. She'd arranged her cap and gown in the maintenance room as a message, then climbed to the bell tower and closed the hatch behind her. The plan was to stay there for weeks, long enough to miss graduation, long enough for scholarship deadlines to pass, long enough that going to MIT was no longer an option. She'd thought that after enough time, she could come down, claim she'd had a breakdown, and everyone would understand she couldn't be that perfect person anymore. She hadn't accounted for the discovery of the corridor, for the investigation expanding so rapidly, for the impossibility of leaving without being seen. She'd stayed up there, listening to investigators searching below, paralyzed by fear and shame, surviving on rainwater, growing weaker each day. By the time they found her, she'd been in the tower for 9 days. 3 more days, doctors said, and she wouldn't have survived. MIT rescinded her scholarship. Princeton and Stanford did the same. But Penn State quietly offered her admission for spring semester, a chance to start over, to be ordinary. Sarah accepted. The hidden room and corridor were sealed permanently. The bell tower hatch was welded shut. Richland High held memorial services for the 10 girls whose remains had been discovered, and Sarah Wexler, who'd been the perfect student for 18 years, graduated from Penn State in 2003 with a degree in library science. She never made the dean's list. She was, by all measures that had once defined her, entirely ordinary. And according to those who knew her, she seemed genuinely happy. Detective Vance, who retired in 2004, gave one interview about the case. Years later, she said the lesson was simple. We build rooms in our lives to hide the things we don't want to face. Sometimes they're physical rooms. Sometimes they're impossible standards. Either way, those rooms become prisons, And the longer secrets stay sealed behind locked doors, the more dangerous they become. The Richland High bell tower still stands, though the hatch remains sealed. There's a small memorial plaque in the school's main hallway now, listing the names of the 10 girls. It simply says, "Remembered, 1954, 1958. Sarah Wexler never returned to Richland. She works as a librarian in Ohio now, not the MIT graduate everyone expected. In 2015, she agreed to speak with a researcher studying academic pressure. Her advice was simple: perfect doesn't exist, and chasing it will cost you everything. Those girls who died weren't weak. They were just convinced that being less than perfect was the same as being nothing. But I'm less than perfect, and I'm here. That's not nothing. That's actually everything." 27 years have passed. The students at Richland High don't know the full story now, but the bell tower is still there, silent and sealed. A reminder that there are no locked rooms that can keep you safe from time. Life only moves in one direction, and the only real choice is whether we move with it or let it leave us behind. Sarah Wexler chose to move. She survived, and somewhere in Ohio, she's living proof that ordinary can be extraordinary, that imperfect can be enough, and that the scariest thing about graduation isn't what comes after. It's the fear of never finding out.